them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Okay, recording. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Pod Damn America, a podcast by idiots for everyone. I don't know. Hi, I'm Jake Flores. Alex Patak is here.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm Jake's friend. Thanks for coming.
Anders Lee is here.
Anders Lee here. The show's not for cops, but there are probably a couple listening.
No cops.
Addendum, not for cops.
Yeah, not for cops, or maybe for only for cops. I don't know. Depends what we're trying to do here.
Only for the FBI agent specifically assigned to our podcast.
Right. That might be a big portion of our listenership.
Today, we are joined by a special guest, Mamoudou NDiaye, comedian, and general cool person. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope cops are listening because I'm not talking real spicy about them. So,
your ears burning, cops? Well, it's because we're about to talk about you.
NYPD is going to put out the press conference like, we heard them talking about us. We didn't see it, but we heard it. It's bumping in our ears.
Well, actually, so I wanted to talk about this book called The End of Policing today, which would be kind of like the thing we're going to work off of. And the author of it, Alex Vitale, has said that he does readings all over the world, and especially in other countries, like cops come and they like have to secretly confide in him and be like, I really like your book, but I can't tell anyone at the force. So,
They'll kill me.
Yeah.
They'll find me and they'll kill me.
So there is, in theory, there are some cops, who are maybe into police reform, but it's totally against the culture. So if you're secretly listening to this, cop, just don't let the headphones get pulled out of your computer at the station while we're, yelling about whatever the fuck, poppers and kratom and shit.
Right. If you guys have like a cat on the desk that's like the police station cat and he just like walks across the keyboard and stuff, you cannot let him yank your headphones out, blasting our podcast out for everyone to hear.
Yeah, they'll think you're Serpico. They'll fucking kill you.
One of the more like jarring things I've heard him say when I've like been looking at interviews with him this past week is he says he'll talk to cops or former cops who like originally wanted to work with kids or work with homeless people or people with mental illness, and that's the only thing.
Curls.
Like this is the
police force. See the world.
Yeah.
Wait, but what happened? Sorry, say the last part.
Then what?
Just like this is the only thing you can do in a lot of cases where you can actually do anything close to like what we should be doing in these communities, like actually treating mental illness. The closest thing is becoming a cop.
Right, you can shoot them with a gun.
There's no money in it, and the social shit. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this week has actually, or I guess this moment, so like the last month or so, has brought around my new favorite type of viral video, which is indignant police officers yelling at you to be nice.
Yeah. I mean, you got stopped, right, Jake? You spent a night in the slammer.
I got stopped very forcefully by like 10 cops on my fucking head. I got tackled.
You straight up desisted.
Wait, what day was it and where was it?
It was Saturday.
I'm over here like, oh my God, we could have been at the same protest. Wow.
It was like the second day. It was the Saturday, like a week and some change ago in Flatbush, and it was next to the burning dumpster, if you saw that shit at all.
Okay, what time?
Are you a cop? Hold on, what's happening?
With the burning dumpster.
Okay, cool. Did you get a look at the person who burnt the dumpster?
Yeah. No, it was like 10 or 11 or something like that when I got stomped or whatever.
Okay, yeah, because that Saturday I was out at Flatbush. You know the video of the car that like went through those protesters when they had the gate up?
Yeah.
I was there. I wasn't in front of the car, but I saw that happening. And then the reason why I asked about like how many cops are on you is because me and we went to the city, and in Union Square, like the bike cops pulled up, and I'm not getting arrested by a bike cop. That's just not in my nature. Like, there's no fucking way. It's just not in my ethos. So it couldn't happen. You had to run that back. But I was out here roasting cops, and I told dude he had a orthodontist chin. I was like, there's no way you should be a cop. You look like you could fix the fuck out some teeth. And all of a sudden, all the cops came from out of nowhere. Like, it's the bike cops and these wild like spandex joints, and then the white collars, the blue collars, and they were just tackling people, like just putting them down on the ground, and like there was mad people on them. And I saw one cop like full on sweep the leg on this dude, and he hit the pavement hard. So when I saw you talking on Twitter about like, yo, I'm about to get arrested, I was like, yo, are we in the same place? I was really curious. And then people on Twitter were like, "Oh yeah, we're checking it on him. We know where he is." I'm like, all right, thank God. I hope he wasn't the person that I saw just get demolished.
Oh, Jake got Cobra Kai'd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they swept the leg on me. A cop came up to me doing the Karate Kid thing with the 1 foot overcoming.
Do you guys see the video of the white guy squares off and has like a one-on-one street fighter engagement with a cop?
No.
Oh man.
Please.
Where he snakes the leg at the end. It's great. There's like 3 dodges and then a full-on tackle.
Wow.
And his head makes like a clunk sound.
Those are the most satisfying things to watch. Probably second most satisfying thing I've seen all week is, I gotta look up this guy's name. I'll put a clip in of him right here, but there's a guy who is like a lawyer or something, and he's white, I'm assuming, because he's able to get away with this, but he's been making these videos on YouTube where he just goes up to cops and he starts talking at them like a cop.
Yeah.
And it like it like fucking fries the cops' circuits. Like, they don't know what to do when another person talks like that, so they just...
It's like when you bite a dog to teach it discipline.
Who are you?
I'm asking the questions. Where have you been today?
No,
have you been here?
I'm asking the questions. You're on this property. You're on this property, so you need to answer my questions.
Are you drunk? Why are you slurring your words today? So have you been here all day, or have you been out? Have you been to the bar today at all?
Who are you?
Have you been to the bar today?
Who are you?
I'm an investigator.
Investigator for who?
Investigative journalist. I investigate corrupt officials. So I'm wondering, where have you been today? Have you been here all day, or have you been out at the bar at all?
Working on a fraud case. That's where I've been.
Okay. Have you been to the bar at all today?
No.
Okay. You got any drugs on you? Have you used any drugs today?
What a ridiculous question.
That's not a ridiculous question. Do you know where he's been today?
I don't keep tabs on him.
Okay.
Out and about.
Do you know what time his shift started?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Does he usually drink on the job, or no? Not that anybody knows of for sure. Have you guys ever breathalyzed him while he's been on the job? Would you submit to a breathalyzer for me right now?
You're ridiculous. You know that?
Hey.
You've got about 5 minutes to get out of here right now.
Or what?
Or what? You're on
My
law
property.
enforcement. This isn't your
Yeah,
property.
it is. Shut the hell up. Get out of here now.
What'd you say?
I said shut up and get out
No,
of here.
you get out of here now.
Hey, you better get your boy. Get your butt back in your office
You
and do
shut
your
up.
job.
You shut up and get
You
out
get
of
your
here.
butt back in your office and do your job.
No. No.
You quit drinking on the job. You understand me?
Whatever.
You punk ass. You get your ass back in there. You don't look back here again. I'll be watching you.
It's so wild because like you see them short circuit. They're like, never been treated like I treat people, and they're like, what are you supposed to do? But those fight videos now, I've seen mad fights. I have been in the Delancey McDonald's so many times. I've seen mad fights. My man was mixing it up with this cop, and you could tell he had hands. And when he swept that leg, it's like a 10-second clip. My man had 10 seconds, and he put him on the ground, and that is satisfying. It's like learning you could fly. It was
the
so
closest to a
dope.
video game I've ever seen in real life.
My favorite. My favorite has been the one. I'm pretty sure it was in Britain, because there was the guy who was running away from a cop, an unarmed cop, and they go on the boardwalk, and he stops, and he finally stops, and then he pushes the cop in the water and like runs back. And I know that's in the UK because the laws of gravity are just like different there, to where hijinks like that occur more. Like that couldn't have happened physically in the United States. Like I'm sure Yakety Sax started playing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100. That's the Monty Python shit for real. For real. Like there's no way that would work here. Also, we don't have bodies of water open like that. But I would love to see a cop try and tackle someone and fall into like the Washington Square Park fountain.
Right.
Like, I would turn around and clown him. I would 100% would.
That cop got
Top on the
fucked
list
up
of our
by...
police reforms needs to be a space for tomfoolery.
Yes, exactly. Can we have a little bit of whimsy in the bill?
We can learn from the fact that our friends across the pond are fucking up the cops with Mr. Bean, you know?
Right.
They got Rowan Atkinson out of retirement just to do Mr. Bean as pranks on him.
Yeah. How's everyone doing? Mamoudou, how's your week been? All things considered, I guess.
I mean, like, for me personally, like, I don't know how long you've been following me, but I've been working on like a short film about this sort of stuff for a while, and like talking about this has always been in my set. Like, this is like not new information, but I will say that it does feel like the needle's moved a lot more than it has in my entire lifetime. So, while, things are a little bit traumatic and, you outside and you staring down a cop, and that cop is literally just like holding the stick, like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. When it turns to 8:01, it's a pack up for you, my friend. Like, that is always a little bit harrowing, but I think that I'm really, looking at things like what's going on in Minneapolis, putting the Midwest on the map, and being like, yo, we're taking down this target. We are not going to stop until we are defunding and then absolutely getting rid of the police force. And it's a beautiful thing because, like, it's things that I've always wanted. I grew up learning about, and that I didn't think I would see in my lifetime. So I'm just kind of, trying to be vigilant as I always am, but, still very happy to see police officers quitting, and seeing people record the things that Black people complained about their entire lives, and some people paid attention to and could turn away. But I think that you can't start a rebellion when no one has jobs and we're all supposed to stay inside. Everyone needs a reason. So like, it's so nice to see that change happening, even if it's incremental. It's a lot more than the change that's happened in the past, and I say we just keep that machine going.
Yeah, well, that's so crazy. That's what's so crazy about this is, like, it feels like so much is happening. Like, so much society is happening right now, and this is incremental. Like, this is probably going to land us, with some yardage, but not, all the way to the end of the field or whatever. But it's all right. You do love to see it, I've been playing. Yeah, I've been hoping for my entire life to see a Target get burned down, apolitically, just. So I'm also feeling a lot,
I was really surprised because, like, how many people really defended, like, buildings and corporations and money. I'm like, do y'all like stop caring? I'm like, there's no way that I'm gonna be out here like putting my body in between me and a Burlington coat factory. What's wrong with you? Grow up. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, I'm not personally a looter. I don't want to because it's just not in me. But like, I was like, yeah, go for it. Get what you want. Get your fucking accoutrement. That's what you fucking want. Go for that shit, bro.
There's a part of it that's like the what's it called? So, in Nickelodeon when they used to just let a kid loose in the store for 10 minutes and you could put everything in the shopping cart.
Chopped? Is that what you're talking about?
No, something sweepstakes. Alley-oop me on this.
Yeah, I do remember this. I don't know the name of it, and normally I'm really good at like that, like 90s Nickelodeon shit. But
Slime Town.
I know what you're talking about. Slime
I didn't
Town?
have cable.
Yeah, they called it Slime Town, and they've been encouraging this kind of behavior for decades now. And you expect when all law and order is up for grabs and people don't have jobs and there's no guarantee of health care and there's just beatings in the street, we're not going to go and take as many copies of Rock'em Sock'em robots as we can fit in our bags. Fuck that.
What's wrong with you?
Time to
I'm
go.
getting all these fucking nerds roped. Get the fuck out of my way.
Yeah.
I don't even like them.
Yeah, I just want them. What's the point? It's about the message.
Yeah, I would loot something I didn't even want. But I mean, honestly, also, there's a great clip. I'll try and find it and link in the show notes or something of this this woman just sort of explaining to some, naive reporter who sort of asks her, what do you think about the looters or whatever? And she sort of breaks it down and explains, like, as we've talked about, like, who gives a shit, you know, this whole myth of they're just trying to break us up or whatever. But she's also sort of explaining, like, you know, if you look at the history of, like, this country racially, you know, you built the damn country yourself. You know, are offered no compensation and for 400 years. And then after that, she's like making this metaphor about it. It's like, what if you were playing a game of Monopoly and they didn't let you keep any money the first 400 rounds? And then after the next 50 rounds, they just burn your money down. Like every time you build a hotel or whatever, they burn it down, you know. And she's going like, yeah, of course. Like, why?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
Yeah.
Why?
Kimberly Jones, right?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah, no, I mean that moment's so beautiful, mostly because it's like there's so much truth to what she's saying. It's just that, like, the the myth of opportunity in this country, you know, it's all to go to these billionaires and people who just are going to hoard that wealth with no intention of giving back in any sort of way. So you're out here made to build your life on scraps, and then the moment that you build something that's even, you know, livable, someone comes through to burn it down. So that cycle has been happening for so long. And, you know, when I was working on that short film, I was supposed to highlight this cycle of violence, the cycle that we continue to find ourselves in. And that's, I mean, it's got to break at some point. You can only do the same thing to people so many times and push them against the wall and kill them and, you know, take resources from them. And, you know, you can't keep doing that. You're building a pressure system, and that's going to blow up at some point. And it finally did, thank God.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing people temporarily, you know, giving up on the various social contracts that were sort of, you know, implied to be all engaged in. But the one thing also that she keeps mentioning in that video is you broke the contract. Like, the contract's broken and you broke it. So that's why this is sort of happening.
Facts.
I want to talk a little bit, or I want to talk probably for, you know, the bulk of this show, I guess, about The End of Policing, though, which is a book by a guy named Alex Vitale. And the reason being is that, so I don't know where we're at. No one really knows what's happening and what's going to be the future of this. We are still establishing, like, these temporary autonomous zones and stuff in, like, Seattle. You know, there's this news about the Minneapolis city council possibly disbanding the police department. You know, no one really knows what's happening, but there is a big fear in my mind, at least, and I think a lot of people's minds, of is this going to get, like, just sort of watered down by, you know, liberal opportunists and stuff, because you're starting to see, like, you know, like, okay, there was that guy with the beret the other night who, like, made a little viral video where he's, like, you know, doing the hokey pokey with the cop or whatever, and he's, like, you know, bringing everyone together or whatever. It turns out, somebody looked him up, he's like an Instagram influencer. He's not from New York, you know?
Yeah.
There's another video of a woman yelling at everyone in Manhattan, and she's saying, like, you know, this is not your neighbor, or this is your neighborhood, people live here or whatever. And turns out no one mentioned she was a former Obama aide. And the thing is, also, she was in, like, Midtown Manhattan. Like, no one lives there. No one, you know, like, it's kind of, so you see, you know, I guess what seems to be happening to me is that either there are legitimate, like, COINTELPRO, just agent provocateurs and undercover cops and stuff, or liberals have done the work for them by sort of, you know, digesting all of this information and convincing themselves that, you know, that we need to be doing, like, you know, the Macarena with the cops or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
I really want to. I wish there was a cop video, because they keep dancing with cops. It'd be cool if they just daggered, like they just let the cop just run and jump and split his legs onto you and shit. I don't know.
just bring a ladder, play some wild dance song, and just have him jump off the ladder onto you.
Yeah, but, like, he's the woman. I don't know. Like, to show you, like, with respect for the community, you know. I don't know. So
yeah.
So what I'm getting at, though, like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, it seems like we are getting, whether we like it or not, past the initial phase of, you know, outright like physical protest and you know, retaliation for having broken the social contract, and now we're starting to get into what happens next. What is the abolition or reform that looks like this, or that comes after this, look like? Because the momentum has dwindled a little bit, but also we're starting to see these you know, these concessions come from the actual government. Like we're starting to win a little bit, and it sounds like the Democrats and like Biden and people like that are going to come in and kind of go like, okay, I'm going to take it from here, and then that equals nothing, giving the cops more money or something like that.
Well, he's not going to do anything with it.
Right.
He's being very vocal about that. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to win.
Well, and
I've never seen a man more committed to taking an L than Joe Biden. Like my man, every single time, well, hey, can you do this thing? He's like, I got you. I want to do the opposite of what I've just been told. Like, come on, bro. Like,
Exactly.
I'm not convinced that my man looks in the mirror and recognizes himself. There's no way. His brain has to be oatmeal.
Well, as we've discussed on this
he's
show, he has lead paint poisoning from paint, I think. That's my own personal conspiracy theory.
He's got something because he's a professional politician. How hard is it to just read the room and just say you'll do these things and then later not do them?
Right.
That's literally your whole job.
That's what
You're
Trump did.
75 years old.
Yeah. Well, No, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that the wild thing about all of this is, like, to your point about like no one really knows what's really going on, is that like the country is in this very delicate position where the next truly probably 50 years is gonna be chosen by this election. And I think that's because we have things like RBG could die, and now we have another Supreme Court. That's 3 Supreme Court picks by the same dude. We have a possible presidential candidate who is the furthest from what we want. We have apathetic voters like, I don't even want to vote for this dude, but I have to because of this. You always want to enthusiastically vote for people, but unfortunately, the people that we're trying to vote, that we're trying to have represent us, are all giving these really weak responses, like Nancy Pelosi taking a knee in Kente Club. Like, that's not what we want. I don't need a show of solidarity that is straight up bullshit. I need an actual declaration of intent of what to do. And I think part of that is built on so much of this country is really good at labeling the problem and saying this is a problem, but never having steps past that. And I think that even in my mindset, I was just like, police brutality's got to end, and then had to sit back with, oh my gosh, what's going to come next after the end of policing, which is what this book is about. And of course, it is abolition, but that requires people to understand that, and that information is not being, shared with the public in a way that it is necessary for them to understand there are plans and ideas in place to make this work. So I'm really excited to see what's happening in Minneapolis, but I mean, is there going to even be support publicly from that? Because my biggest worry is the police that are being displaced from their jobs retaliating in some sort of way.
Right.
Yeah.
You can see them while you're protesting, just counting, like taking account. I know you. I'll remember you. I'll remember you. I'll be working this job in a month, and you won't be here, and then I'll kick your ass.
Exactly.
Well, one of the sort of silver linings, I guess, of the American system, which is the very, very dark cloud, of course. I was reading about this today. Stuart Schrader wrote this book about, it's called Making the American Gulag. And basically when in the mid 20th century, when policing as sort of an apparatus was being developed more in the U.S., the goal was to just make it the opposite of the Soviet Union, where there's a very strong central body that everyone, reported to. And so by design, it's very decentralized. So that definitely has a lot of negatives to it, right? But there are also some silver linings in that we can kind of bypass having to go through the federal government. And some, obviously the federal government plays a big role, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much what Biden is or isn't willing to do if we can just attack it at the local level, which we're starting to see in Minneapolis. I think everybody, the whole world is watching right now to see where that goes.
Yeah, on some level.
And on Silver, I'm sorry, you go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, in addition to silver linings, although there's, a dark hole of depression if you look at any kind of federal politics happening in the United States right now, there has been a few people who've stepped up in ways that's really encouraging for where we'll be going from here. Because like Andrews was saying, Donald Trump is president right now. He would just have all of us shot, but he can't. So, of
my God.
like on Saturday I got all the way. We did a march from Grand Army all the way to Washington Square, and we got there in time for a speech from Jumaane Williams, who was saying all the right things I expect from a politician right now. And it has been present at all of these protests and has been de-escalating conflicts every night when the curfew was going down. And so you are seeing more leadership that represents the values of the progressives in this country in a way that is totally absent otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is we have been intentionally led to believe by media, by news, by unions, by all these things that our society cannot survive without the police. Right. And it can. It's an intentional miseducation that is supposed to put them as heroes. And then you ask the people, be like, oh, what are you going to do when this happens? It's like, well, I'm hoping that there will be programs and systems in place that we can take this $16 billion and put them into these programs to make sure that those things don't happen and nip those things in the bud as early as possible, and also care for ourselves. And they're like, well, they're peacekeepers. I'm like, I don't know if you were watching the last 2 weeks. Ain't no peace. And if anyone was peaceful, it was protesters with their hands up, and it was these cops that were waiting for any reason to swing on people, and they took it even if there wasn't a reason. So it's like we have a hero worship that is tied to cops in this country that it needs to be demystified. And I think that, these videos of people, showing straight up like, this is what a police officer did to me. And, I'll say it, as a person who has been to a lot of protests, I have seen many a white person get locked up, but I've never seen them get the shit beat out of them the way that they did in these protests. When I was sitting here, I was like, oh, they beat the shit out of white people? Oh, fuck, it's on and popping. What is going on? And like to see that, and then like not only here, but just like the global swell of like support for Black Lives Matter and, Black lives in America, but also the people, and then, exposing the racism within all the other societies and the anti-Blackness in all the other countries has been just like inspiring to see, because there is a world outside of policing. It just, it requires an understanding of just like how the police were militarized in the first place, where the police's,
exactly,
racism and white supremacy comes from. And that stuff has been intentionally, not told to us. And unfortunately, in order to get to the very last person who's holding out for we need police, they need to hear this information. They need to know it. But there's so many other blocks in place that have like made police look like they're doing a good job, when in actuality, they are probably the biggest parts of the problem in this country when it comes to, being a threat to safety for Black people, for women, for queer people. Like it's such a situation that just needs to be addressed, but it's so multi-level, and it's just insidious how they, painted the picture of being a hero while being exactly the opposite.
Right. And I guess that kind of dovetails nicely with what my main kind of take on the police is after reading all this stuff, and also just lifetime experiences and all this shit. But I kind of think what's going on right now is we have this big daunting task, which is to get everyone to understand what's happening. Because like you're saying, the police are decentralized and they're local, right? So we might end up with this like scattershot of like some abolition somewhere, and some states have police and some don't. You don't know, but because we can't have it come from the top down, really, right? So, but I think what's good is that we are seeing not just the entire country, but the entire world kind of join forces with this thing, and it's because I think the internet is helping to prevent us from getting into a disjointed narrative where like some people think one thing and the other people think the other. There's one big unifying source of information that is sort of demystifying the police in a really specific way. And I think what I would say about the police is that they qualify as something that this anthropologist named Hobsbawm, I think is his name, defined as an invented tradition. So the idea being that there are things in the world that a lot of work has been put into, whether it's on purpose or whether it just de facto happened, convincing you that this thing has just always existed when it's actually rather recent of a construct. So one example that Hobsbawm talks about, this is less political and just kind of funny or whatever, is just like Scottish shit, like bagpipes and the kilts and all that stuff. It's presented as like this sacred like tradition, like, you know, deep in these people's sort of culture and stuff. But then he makes an argument where he kind of, and I don't know, I haven't read all of his shit about Scottish stuff, but let's just come with me on this. He sort of goes like, look, it all started in this one year when there was this political reason for Scots to need to sort of differentiate themselves from like the Irish and stuff. And it's like, you know, it's one of those
here
things.
it comes.
It was The Simpsons, Groundskeeper Willie.
Irish bigotry is the foundation of this country.
Yeah. Well, it's also funny how much cops like love bagpipes and you have to play them at their funerals and shit. All I'm saying is they're all made
There's
up.
no fucking way a cop loves a bagpipe. There's no way. Like, listen, I went to a school, College of Worcester, shout out, independent minds working together. I went there, and our school, like, if you could play the bagpipes, you got a full ride scholarship, and that is not a joke. And imagine living on campus, and there's a grown adult playing the bagpipes in the morning to practice so they can keep their scholarship, and everything is so bagpipe related and like I'm like, there's no way that this is the foundation of a culture. Like, there's no way that this is part of their musical oral tradition. I'm like, this sounds like a six-pack of ass. This is terrible.
How much time did they have to differentiate themselves from the Irish? They're like, oh, we have to get something in 1 hour. Just find whatever's in your apartment.
I got a pillowcase. Oh, good. Take that. All right. I got a pipe, some flutes. Yeah, let's throw that together.
Yeah, I have a skirt.
yeah. I got this man skirt. You want that? Yeah, sure. Let's fuck it.
Yeah. So like I said, like I don't even know how true that is, but at least the model he's trying to explain is there are things like that in life where at some point in your life you think like, oh, you know, fucking whatever. Capitalism is an example of one. All these other things, you know, the big mainstays that just form our society are, you know, they're all to some extent invented traditions or whatever. And a lot of them are intrinsically entwined with this concept of like modernity, I think, and that's how you make a lot of arguments about why these things need to stay in place. Because, okay, so what I'm getting at is there are a lot of arguments for the police and against abolition that basically go, you don't understand. The police are the only thing standing in between you and the way things used to be before they existed, which was utter chaos and everyone was a pirate and all this shit and you couldn't go outside and all this stuff. And that, I think, is ahistorical. And what the way to demystify this and to make this, you know, argument back in the other direction is to point out that like the cops don't really do anything except protect property, and there are a lot of problems, and we'll go through all these topics, you know, chapter by chapter in this book in a minute here, but you know, most of them you'll see kind of have the same pattern to them, which is that like with, you know, drugs or sex work or something like that, these things already existed before the police. They exist during a police state at the exact same rate. They just sort of get like worse, or they're just punished more, which just leads to, you know, worse problems. So like the police don't actually really stop crime in the way that they're you know, that they're arguing that they do. I think that's like the big myth, is that like all hell would break loose because now all these people that want to do, there are a lot of people that like want to commit crimes that are deterred by just the fact that police exist, which isn't really true, I don't think. I think that human nature is not that dark, but that's sort of a central cultural value we have, is to understand that it is, you know.
Yeah, and it's hearkening for an era that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that and again, this is, you know, as somebody, I work with Color of Change, and like a lot of their work is about like, you know, fixing police narrative, fixing the narrative of Black and brown people on screen. The police have had control of their image for so long, and every single cop show is like, only I can do it, and I'm going to do it outside the law or inside the law. It doesn't matter. Whatever the law is, I'm going to be inside or outside. It's Schrodinger's law. Like, they don't give a fuck. So like, I don't enjoy that there's like this myth that they're so necessary that is just, you know, virulent in society, and it's being propagated by all the stuff that you just said. But at the same time, there's a media narrative that is, you know, reinforcing that myth that like, oh, we got to call the cops and they're going to come and be helpful. Like, how many times have you called the cops and they've gotten there in a timely manner? How many times have you called the cops and they got there and they didn't make it even worse than the situation was going to be?
Right.
How many times you got into there and then you felt even more unsafe than when called them? And like, I think that the idea that a police officer equals safety is so antiquated because it comes from a period where like, I think police officers are meant to protect, like you said, property, but also white property. Like you think about schools, like a security resource officer, yeah, they might be able to de-escalate with a white student, but it's not gonna happen with a black student. And I've seen that sort of stuff happen. It makes me very uncomfortable to walk past it. I've walked past people that'll be like, "Oh, thank God there's a precinct near you." I moved to New York. My neighbor Roy sat me down. Nice dude, great, wonderful guy, our insurance guy. Sat us down and he sat me down and goes like, "When you move to New York, I want you to live near a police station." And I was like, "Roy, I don't think you understand a goddamn thing about this." And I had to explain it to him. He goes like, "Oh, well, there's some good cops, some bad cops." And I had to explain it. And this is me at 18. I was like, just so you know, the law that they're enforcing was not built for me. So the law that they're enforcing is racist. So that law enforcement is racist. I'm not going to live near a police station.
This is with your real estate agent?
No, this is insurance dude. He's like had our car insurance also. It's like, I lived in Worcester, Ohio. It's a very small town, and I lived in a cul-de-sac, one of the only black families in that neighborhood. And I had black friends all around the town and stuff like that. But like when I was in my neighborhood, this was a dude who's like, it's that very provincial, like picket fence sort of like, story where I pull out of my driveway, I see my neighbors, I wave, and I go. And that's part of how I grew up. Not my entire life, but like that's part of it. And my man, he said, "Oh, New York," and he has this idea of New York, and he's like, "Here's what's gonna make you safe." And I was like, I understand that you think a cop makes things safe, but that's just not the case. And having to go through those levels of explaining it to him, and this was just supposed to be a quick 10-minute conversation, whole hour talking about this specific unpacking of like, cops aren't here for me, and what they're doing isn't safety. What they're doing is literally fear mongering. Like, I don't feel safe. They're literally trying to scare crime out of people,
right.
And it's not gonna happen.
Your conversation just goes back to 1876 all of a sudden.
Yeah. I have a laser pointer and a PowerPoint. I'm like, I hate when I have to bring this out. All right, so slave catchers. Yeah.
A lot of resentment towards union carpetbaggers. Now, was that justified?
Well, speaking of the historical origins of the modern police state, we should dive right in there because that's where this whole book starts, and that's where this sort of like conversation starts, like you're saying, with explaining any of this shit and trying to get anyone out of the paradigm of, officer friendly or whatever. You kind of have to understand what the cops are and what the world was like before them. And so, like, what's interesting about police, I guess, to me, is that, throughout history, throughout, monarchies and things like that, there were like these militias, and they sort of were apolitical in the sense that they always worked for the king. And, various other nobility that squandered with each other did not have their constant alliance in the way that the king did. And so it always enforced, the main guy. And at some point later on, around the 19th century, 20th century, this thing sort of morphs into more of a publicly state-owned thing in various ways, but it's all over the map in all different places. So like in England, you sort of have like this thing called the Guard that that comes out of militias and that eventually turns into like the British just police as we know them. But in America, we don't have we don't have a king, and so it kind of came directly more from transparently from capital, and it happened in the form of, as many people know now, largely because what Colin Kaepernick did by bringing it directly into the public consciousness, or at least on a a national like celebrity scale, is that a big part of our modern police state comes from fucking slave catchers, right? It wasn't, that was sort of one faction. There's also, I mean, if you look into like where the Texas state troopers come from, which are just this weird, like Texas is just fucking like this. It just has its own police on top of the regular police. Those, for example, came from basically after the U.S., just took over a bunch of Mexico. All the Western U.S. just used to be Mexico, as we talked about a lot on the show. displaced all these people, and then they ended up being, somewhat able to come back onto what was their own land. Well, Texas had their own police force that was just designed to keep Mexicans from voting and running for office and stuff like that. And it ultimately wasn't successful, but the fucking Texas state troopers are just still around. That's what they're there for if you live in Texas and you see those fuckers. Or at least that's what they were originally there for, and now they're just sort of like, continued on and existing, and I don't know, whatever the fuck they think they do these days or whatever. But then they're, and then,
Walker, Texas Ranger.
Yeah, that's exactly what his fucking job came from. That's who he was really roundhouse kicking, And
Can't sneak that past me.
the other thing I would say, probably the big main pillar of modern American police is strike breaking. So a lot of these people came from, Pinkertons and stuff like that. And people that like private sort of military policing organizations that were designed to basically just break up organized labor. And, this is also where like prisons came from, really, or not prisons, like prisons in their modern sense, not prisons in general, but like, prisons,
right.
Interestingly, I got to write her name down, but I was listening to an abolitionist today talk about this. She's talking about how like during like slavery, like the prisons were full of white people because like if you wanted to punish a slave, they were already, there's no reason to throw them in prison.
Exactly.
They were full of white people because the people they would throw in prisons, the function of the prisons back then was to punish people that were not basically complicit in, exploiting capital. So if you were just a bad worker, essentially, that's where you'd end up. And prisons sort of cropped up also, in their larger, slightly more modern state in California because of all this border stuff I'm talking about. You had, basically Filipinos and Mexicans that were being, exploited for cheap labor who decided to unionize and, defend the fact that they were being exploited for cheap labor. All of a sudden there's this convenient place to fucking throw them so that you can strike break and shit and keep people from organizing. I don't know.
I thought this was I'm sorry, you go. You're the guest.
No, please go ahead. No.
I thought this was the best part of the book to me, the history of policing stuff, because after this it goes into the various topics of how police affect change in different niches of society. But this is stuff that it's not like really viral. I feel like this isn't talked about that much on the internet. But the main difference between a militia and a modern American police state is the perception of one is it's the king's men. It's inherently political. You know who the police are. They have a big insignia on their chest and they work for the king. The other one is considered apolitical. It's moralizing. The public perception is the police are there to quote unquote protect you and to keep law and order established on a morality level. And in addition to all of the strike breaking and slave catching and all the stuff Jake was talking about, he goes into how the American empire in the 20th century essentially ends up like duplicating and establishing this essentially like last 200 years-ish new infrastructure in other countries around the world. So like the reason there's police the way we think of them now in Japan is like we went and put them there. They were we dropped them off.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, there's sort of an interplay between us sending people over to like the Philippines, for example, or to places we're colonizing in like other parts of the world, like Africa or something like that, or setting up these police states rather, and them bringing a lot of that technology home, which is how we get this police militarization, right? To take the tools of colonization and just bring them home and use them on our own fucking populace. But there are also a lot of interesting characters.
Fingerprints.
Yeah. There's a guy named his last name's escaping me, but his name's Smedley Butler. Okay, he was a guy.
Yeah, war is a racket.
Yeah. So he was one of these guys who came home, but then he eventually ended up ended up, he committed a lot of war atrocities and hate crimes and shit in his career, but he ended up going kind of Serpico later on in life after, like, they tried to install him as the first and only emperor of America. I need to read more about this guy's life because he's...
I gotta read about
Butler
this one.
redemption arc.
It's fucking crazy. I was making fun of his name on Twitter, and somebody was like, "No, you don't understand. You have to read the rest of his story," and it looks insane. But yeah, he was almost emperor of Mexico or emperor of
they
America.
they tried to hire him to just knock out Roosevelt and just like start it, and then Roosevelt found out about it and then just didn't do anything. Like they felt they were too scared to even like go after the people who were plotting it.
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, I think for me, especially because being a black dude, like the hard part about being black and also African, I'm from Mauritania, is that like there's understanding in America. America is the center of the world. It is the crown jewels, the bastion of hope, free speech, all that sort of stuff. And the black people here are treated so poorly, but around the world, people don't look at it. They look at America, oh, wow, look at the black people. They're protesting in this sort of way. We're all going to stand up at the same time. And it's like what you were saying. It's like these internet, just going to different countries and setting up police states. It's like people were like, oh, why is Japan protesting? I'm like, yeah, they have police. And those police aren't going to be clean. I'm from Mauritania. When I went back home in December, police and the military were stopping us at checkpoints. And the moment they found out that I was American, they were out here being like, hey, let's get a little bit of money. So it's like that corruption is still in all these different places, and they all have guns and all this sort of stuff. But like going back into history, like this book, End of Policing, it just like it seems to be just a wonderful resource. Maybe, as you said earlier, maybe a little bit basic. But the book that like really got me started on like understanding to a deep, place what the police represent in the society is White Rage by Carol Anderson. And, these slave catchers, like, I think that if we want to talk about anything about just like the evolution of police over time, you gotta just remember, like, they come from people who kept slaves too. Like, there's like literally black people weren't like people, they were property, and they were 0/5 of a person for a very long time until it was advantageous for the South to make them 3/5 of a person. So like understanding just like how anti-blackness is built into the police system from just its onset is so key to like even explaining where we're at now. Because yeah, the police are meant to like protect property and stuff like that, but they're still going out of their way to hurt black people who are on their way home from doing nothing, or criminalizing. The system is built to criminalize people one way depending on if they're black or they're white. And I think that whenever I think about policing and like the prison system, like I think it's very funny that it was just used to be all white people. Like, I think that's hilarious to me. I can't even imagine that. But like looking at like where we are now, and just like I don't need to explain it too much. We're just going through like what slavery has become in this world, the exploitation of the working classes, talking about the prison labor. Just like that sort of stuff all has this inherent anti-blackness in it that whenever I do like stand-up comedy, they're like, why do you make everything about race? I'm just like, bro, everything has race baked into it, has racism baked into it. And when I'm talking about the police state, not just here, but also abroad, it's like this racism is built into it because the people that they were trying to police at first were people who looked like them. And they thought that just because you're not doing work and making this money, you're going to go to jail. But then when it turned into like, oh, you are either property or you are also not a value to society, or we can justify doing anything to you, we're going to throw you in jail. On top of that, we have this notion that you are less than us. And that compounded over time is what brings us to this moment. But the information that we're talking about right now, how do we like get this to other people? Because we had to go out of our way to learn about this. Like the way that like slavery has turned into, prison labor and stuff like that is something that a lot of people are privy to that information. But like, how do we get to the people that aren't, privy to that information?
Yeah, I think just real quick, overcoming one of the myths that we're going to have to overcome is it's really difficult because like Alex is saying, those old militias that were precursors to the modern police, had the king's symbol on their badge or whatever, and you knew who they worked for. And what we have now is a police that they have a king, right? But they tell you it's one thing and it's actually the other. They tell you the king is peace, right? They tell you we just work apolitically for peace. But in reality, it's this amalgamation of white supremacy, property, the state, all of these things that aren't like, there's not like a physical leader you can put to it, but they're interests that have just developed over time, and they've sort of like entrench their way into just what the police are in ways where they don't even, I think really understand that they're doing it. They're just operating off of like, what racism is just this resentment that builds in you that sort of, there's like a implication in cops that they think like, that things would just be better if they could just finish this job they have of sorting everyone out and getting everyone fucking, put into the place in society where they think they belong or whatever. So what we're really going to have to argue with people about is the basic premise of police, because the myth is, no, you don't understand. They're like this secular thing that, if you could get all this racism and stuff out of it, it would, it would keep people safe and do all the stuff that it says it does. But you have to go back straight to the beginning and understand that this is intrinsically linked. It is baked in, like you're saying. It's the only thing you can do is get rid of it. And what Vitaly talks about in this book is, not so much just he sort of goes through all of these different categories that the police work in, and then basically shows you what reforms have been made and what reforms are being proposed, and how that's sort of like not enough, and then what the alternatives are. And the alternatives usually are heavily implied to be just less police at all, and social work, and just fucking money, and just like investing in the actual cause of the disease rather than the symptoms or whatever, and also not being punitive. And that's what's so weird about the culture of the police, is that they will just insist to the death that the only way for any of the shit in society to get quote unquote fixed is through punitive measures. And no one wants to admit it, but it has to be punitive. It has to be.
I think part of
Go ahead.
I think part of that is like kings. Like, kings are not people who are elected. They're ordained by God, quote unquote. And that comes from the sort of puritanical, like, this is good versus this is bad. And there's not a spectrum of things. There's no rehabilitation. And so, like, we're in this position where, like, people can't imagine a world, like, people are always, like, there's always jokes about on Twitter, like, throw them in jail or, like, lock them up and stuff like that. But it is coming from a place of not really understanding that, like, the implications of that is that all we do with things that we don't like is throw them away. There's no rehabilitation. And I think that that's baked into just society in general. I think that, especially like Western society, Western, even democracies, like, there's good, there's evil, there's law and order to preserve the good and to put away the evil. However, what abolition is trying to do is, relocate these funds, take the cops to zero so they are not necessary, so that way we can focus on policing ourselves in a way that, not even policing, but like making sure that we have systems in place that we can be, restorative and rehabilitative in a way that we haven't really thought about. And I think that it's because we have a culture of disposability. When we think that something is so bad, like, we're like, oh, trash, go away. Great, yeah. But like, is that ever going to change? Like, are we ever going to fix that sort of thing? Like, one of the things I always run back to is that I used to be a 7th grade science teacher, and like, we always wanted to assume the best in people. And I think we've kind of lost that because we've only seen the worst in so many people, or people pretending to be the best, and then we discover the worst in them, and then now they're disposable, they're just like us. I think that I don't really believe that there are good and bad. I think it's really that it's the things that you do. And I think that everybody on social media and in the world wants to be like the arbiters of like what is considered good and wholesome and American, fuck yeah, and all that, but not really trying to think of how are the ways that we can actually like build systems that can cycle out the bad stuff, but make the people who've made mistakes or done things that are heinous back into being productive members of society. It's called a correctional facility, but like, ain't no correction happening. It's just, we're gonna throw you in a hole, and we're gonna like, we're gonna put you there for time. And in that time, it's up to you to figure that stuff out. But we have no systems in place to do that. And then those people just get exploited and used as cheap or free labor, and are even have to pay to talk to people on the outside. And at the drop of a hat, they could be in an even worse situation there, or more time being added to it. And yeah, every single question I'm getting is like, what about the rapists and the murderers and da 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 da? I'm just like, we're trying to build a system where we won't have that.
Yeah, also they already exist and like are largely not deterred by just knowing that there are cops out there.
Also, some of them are cops.
Right.
Right. And they get away with it for way
and they
longer.
get away with it. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like if you ever listened to the last podcast on the left, towards the like end of the 20th century, people start catching up on the grifts. Like if I join the police, I have an excuse to kill for a long time.
Right.
They won't catch me.
Yeah, it's like the Catholic Church where it's like there's a job I can be around children and everyone trusts me. Like we create these fucking things,
alone in a box.
Yeah,
it's a ritual we do.
Well, yeah, and like what you're saying about the racial aspect and the culture of policing, like it's interesting how much the history of it has tracked with like whiteness and developing whiteness and including more different ethnicities coming from Europe into whiteness. My grandfather was born in 1917. Was in the NYPD. Don't cancel me. I didn't know him. But sorry.
It is a rap for you.
Defund Anders' grandfather.
But he
fuck the Anders grandfather. You know that song.
Suck my dick.
Yeah, suck my dick, Anders' grandfather.
I'm sorry, it's really nice, man.
I was gonna say he was Irish. He was born Irish, right? And he couldn't. That was the only job he could get. And then I joked like somewhere around like 1950 or something, he became white because that's how Irish people were incorporated into whiteness, is by proving they could brutalize black people, right? Because at first they were a different thing, and then eventually they got to be part of the club.
Right. There's no part in the entire history of policing where they were ever keeping anyone safe. That wasn't the job description. It was beating up different targets of people, which is what's exciting about this moment, because we're talking about, how do you explain to Roy, the insurance guy, the history of colonialism? But you really don't have to do that to affect this change. You just have to ask people, when has a cop ever helped you? And no one can name one time.
Yeah. The myths are all over TV, but if you ask a human being, they're like, I'm just assuming it would happen at some point. And, eventually.
Statistically.
And it's a wild spectrum of things that we call them for. It's like everything from like, also like, think about it. If we let's just use 3 examples. Say it's a mental health emergency. They're not trained for that. They're not trained in de-escalation. They're trained to fucking come in there and be like, should have called someone else. Like that is what they do. And then if your car breaks down,
I can beat the shit out of your disabled son. Is that what you're calling me for?
Exactly. Or I can shoot your dog. Is that a dog? May I shoot it? Like they can do that for you.
Hey, but if you need someone to shoot your dog, all right?
Dog, I got you, bro. Like I got you. But like middle of the night, your car breaks down. Who you call? AAA, maybe 911. 911 comes, they'll be like, hey, call AAA. Like the things that are like minuscule that you're like, I might need help with, they will always be like, you should have gone somewhere else. And the things that are big that we need help with, they're like, you should have gone somewhere else, or they'll show up and they'll escalate it to a place where it's like, there could have been 1 casualty, now there's 100. And you're like, okay, so what happened? Or there's multiple people in the hospital, or and the thing is like, they're not trying, they're just not built to help you. And I think that part of the paradigm of talking about this is just like, you have to talk about the police from a very racially inclusive spot, because I think that, the intersection of race cannot be like erased from this. And like what you're talking about with Irish people, I think that in this country, whenever white people feel threatened population-wise, they widen the goalposts to allow different types of other European white people to be here. And using the police force as like, all right, cool, Italians, Irish, you trying to join the gang? All right, beat this shit out of
you know what is happening right now with that is
what?
Latinos. There's so many Latin people that are in like ICE now and shit, and Border Patrol, and the police themselves. And fucking dude, I can tell you from being from a Latin family, it's because they convince these motherfuckers. These dudes start getting convinced that they are white, and what they are doing is buying into the grift of white supremacy, which is it's a thing that convinces you you're going to benefit from it. And it's motherfucker, other people are going to benefit off of you thinking you're included in the benefits of this, because it always benefits the people at the top that control the state and have all the fucking money. It's fucking.
And it's what. It's bullshit. Like I can't even imagine what you go through with that, having to deal with that coming from a Latin family, because like, you know, Latinx identity is already so muddled in the sense that like there's not a lot of people who know how to talk about it in a correct way. How many people do you know that know the difference between Hispanic versus Latinx?
Fucking nobody does.
You know that use Latinx, like, and then like you have people who are darker than me looking at me like, no, papi, I'm Dominican. You're negro, I'm Dominican. Negro, Dominican. Like, there's no situation where a cop got his knee on your neck, like, no, papi, no, I'm Dominican. And I'm like, oh shit, 2 for 1 bet. Like, that's the way that like that sort of paradigm of thought thinks. And I think that like, you know, white supremacy is not just like you will benefit from this. It's like we are the model and you need to get as close to us as possible and you will go to the top. But for the most darkest skinned people in this world, you can be as close. You could be wearing the Wild Dockers and Izod Fit Express Polo, hanging out at the golf course. But at the end of the day, you are a black person. Like, that is not going to change just because your mindset is so much being like in a proximity to whiteness mindset. And I think that bringing it up to the present, it's like, yeah, like the fact that like there's a lot of Latinos who just don't believe that they are people of color and want to claim the parts of it they want, but don't want to like understand that like the police are invested in your oppression as well. And I think the ICE agent part is just so insidious because it's like, this is clearly a ploy to be like, oh, look, we're not racist. We have Latinx. Like, they're using you against your own. It's a no-win game where you're like, we're using you against your own people. And also, you will never fully be one of us. I kept yelling at cops, being like, especially black cops, I'm like, if you were walking late at night with a hoodie on, is that cop behind you going to tell, is he going to run up on you, or is he going to know that y'all are family? Because I don't believe that he knows that. And I just kept yelling that at cops, like, and that's all I have left. I'm just like, listen, like, this sounds, I'm never, I feel like my, radicalization has happened in college, really, definitely. But like, I'm at this point where it's like, we can say so much, but at the end of the day, like, if we have tried everything to get you to leave, you don't have to be a cop. You can do data entry for Google. You can be a grocer. You can like sell weed. You can do fucking anything, dog. And you chose to stay on this police force. So it gives you clearly carte blanche to do whatever you want, insofar as you don't do something so bad that it makes the whole police force look good. A white cop kills somebody, yeah, that man.
Hey, what's up? This is Jake. The audio dropped out here for like 20 seconds. So sorry, we're going to miss something. All right, let's return.
Would you believe that right before the beginning of this, I wrote a movie about 4 freelancers planning a heist to rob a billionaire by looting his businesses and everything? And look at what happened now. My movie went from a comedy to a documentary, and I couldn't, normally I'd be like, damn, that's a bag. But I'm so happy because like, the myths that have kind of held us back, that like, oh, we shouldn't be like robbing these businesses, the myths that police are good people, and that like, maybe if he had listened, he would have been fine. The fact that we've gone to every level to demystify the myth that like the police are a good and necessary thing in society, we have to win an optics game. When me and NDiaye were trapped on the bridge, and one thing that came to my mind is that, okay, they can turn their body cams off and wail on us all they want. However, we pull up and we got cameras on them and we're tweeting at the mayor, AOC, Andrew Cuomo, all these people can possibly be watching. It's not a good look. So they let us off the bridge. I don't know if that was the catalyst, but they can't look bad. That propaganda of them dancing with people and taking a knee and dapping people up, it's only for the camera so they can continue to have the positive media image. But because of this sort of democratization of the internet, in the sense that we have all this footage of them doing that stuff, that old man that got pushed down, and my man said like, it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm like, you pushed them, like, people told you to push him. We can hear, we can see. Like, what's wrong with you?
You can see him bleeding out his ears.
Yeah, like,
that's why he thinks it wasn't that big of a deal, is because they destroyed his brain. He's like, everything's fine.
He's already dead, right? Like, what, 3 years left on him? Like, come on, like that was the mentality. They're like, yo, we're allowed to do this. And the fact that like there's so many videos, like this pattern of behavior has already happened so many times for Black people, But like now to see like, oh nah, this can't happen. And what is even wilder is that so many other Black people have died in the last 2 weeks, and all we needed you to do is just arrest 4 people. You locked up mad people. You spilled a lot of blood. You wasted a lot of resources. You committed war crimes, and all we needed you to do is have accountability for 4 people. But you decided no, it's gang gang Treyway till I die, and decided that they're not gonna lock up these dudes. And it took forever for them to make that decision. And so much of this could have been avoided. I think it's necessary, and it should. Honestly, this would have happened at some point, sometime. But I have to take
Perfect
solace.
storm.
Like, things got pushed. Yeah, you create a perfect storm, and you cannot create these pressure systems and expect people not to react.
Well,
and to see what happened, it's been beautiful.
To sort of like round out, since we're about an hour, we can go, another 15, 20 or something like that. I wanted to go through like what the end of policing sort of does, which is it looks at these specific issues and then gives examples of how reform didn't work and what would actually work. So the first one is he talks about how the police state is entrenched in schools, which I thought was really interesting because there was some stuff in this chapter where I was reading it and I was like, that's why they kicked you out of class? I thought it was just because they, were trying to help your grades or whatever. No, it's because neoliberal reform in public schools and later on in charter schools basically set up a situation where teachers' pay is based on students' test scores, and so a way to protect their own paycheck is that they are basically just incentivized and forced into suspending students constantly, which then puts you into the school to prison pipeline. And I don't know if anyone else even listening or whatever has any experience with this, because I didn't realize until I read this book that this was maybe more specifically a Texas thing. But you can get kicked out of school in Texas and get sent to what I got sent to, which is called a supermax school, which is essentially just a prisonized school.
No, I did not have that experience.
Yeah.
I had a normal school experience.
I mean, I taught in a charter school, and it is this sort of like, it's more of teachers as authority as opposed to like, people who are just like cultivating a learning environment. And it sucks because, little Black kids being told, hey, we're getting you ready for college. And I was like, oh, well, why are they in button downs and forced to be in a line and shackled down to these chairs? Because when I was in college, I was definitely playing frisbee and learning parkour. So like, I don't know what this is all about. It's a very real thing. I think that school to prison pipeline is a thing that definitely needs to be talked about, because that sort of, especially for Black kids, like that fear of police is ingrained in them, and like it's like kind of teaching you respectability, so when you enter the world, you don't die. And
right.
It's pretty sinister.
The thing that always broke my heart, even in that school, and also like when I have been in jail and shit, is that like, eventually in order to survive in those situations, you have to humanize your goddamn jailers, and people would start just joking around with them and shit. But like, it's a bad situation. I mean, I got thrown out of school because I swear to God, I'm not lying about this, fucking 18 years later, somebody left a joint in my car, like in my ashtray. It wasn't mine. But I got sent to this thing that was like, I know. So, but fucking school itself, they said it used to be an insane asylum, so it had like these 3-way hallway intersections and stuff, so it was like confusing and hard to escape from and shit, and like you weren't allowed to talk to anyone, and it was mostly Black kids and Latin kids and stuff. And then there was an Asian guy who like me, I made friends with because he was in one of my classes, and he was in for like white collar student crime, which is he got caught just like faking hall passes or whatever to just get his friends out of class and shit, and then it was crazy, right? So
that's cool as hell.
Entrepreneur.
Honestly, that shit is dope as hell.
It was fucking tight.
That 100% should be in charge of the economy. That's so that mind so early. Come on.
The absolute coolest motherfucker in that whole thing when I was in there was this guy who was in front of me on my bus route, right? So you had to take a bus, even if you had a car or whatever. Just fucking the rules are you just have to be in this like austere prison cult thing. And you take a bus every morning at fucking 5 a.m, and then you get there and you're supposed to take off your shoes and your belt and all the money and stuff out of your pockets and give it to this cop. And the cop's job is to count all the money and shit and make sure you have like less than $5 or something, because you can't buy drugs with less than $5. I don't know what the fuck the rationale was, right?
Sure.
You know, it was just money for lunch or whatever. But there was this dude in front of me that figured out legally that they had to count it no matter what form you brought the money in. So he would just dump $5 in pennies on this dude every fucking morning, and you hear him like clattering around the plastic bucket and shit. And this cop had to count 500 pennies every fucking morning. It was so cool. But anyway,
Damn, that sucks.
place was a fucking nightmare. And also in it, like, you know, you operated on this point system where you would. If you earned like 2,000 points or something, you got out of ALC. That's what it was called, Alternative Learning Center, right? But you know, if you got into like a fight with a teacher or something, they would just yell at you and go, negative 500 points, fuck you. Negative 1,000 points, negative 6,000 points, fuck you. You're in here forever, right?
It's like evil Harry Potter.
Yeah, right. We never got to go to the Triwizard tournament or whatever. But. Yeah. The thing that was really disturbing about it was that, you know, I was in there when I was like 18, 17, something like that. And I was in there with kids who they didn't put them back in regular school. If they got stuck in that cycle, you literally just went into like the juvie system. And then I'm assuming, you know, fucking prison from there.
What was interesting about the book is this was like Bush's policy when he was governor of Texas. And I remember in like the early 2000s, late 90s, hearing like Texas is a miracle and the education system there is the best in the country under George W. Bush. Like, how did they do that?
George W. Bush has thrown Jake in jail.
Yeah.
And applauds.
And that's how. It's because, and that's a very like 90s thing now that I'm thinking about it. Because as we talked about before, like with the crime bill, that's the reason for the unemployment numbers in the 90s that like Clinton loves to brag about, is because they weren't counting people who were in jail. And that's the same things with this. It's just, it was like the pinnacle of stat jukery was the 1990s, like pulling the wool over everyone's eyes and making them think that it's great while you're just like throwing people in jail to like, you know, try and ameliorate society's problems.
Right. Yeah.
They turn the schools into prisons, and like every section in this book, they say, can we improve the schools by inserting police? Which is why reading it after chapter like 4, you just kind of have the same mental arc you get watching an extremely dry episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Can we fix sex work by introducing cops? Oh no, they've just been killing all the prostitutes for 500 years.
That's kind of why I think this this book is probably a good resource for like liberals who are maybe afraid of the word abolition or whatever, because like it really beats you over the head with just the concept. But the concept is really important, which is that more cops fucks up anything, a system like schools or something like that more, and the problems that we're talking about existing that the cops are supposedly there to fix would be fixed if you removed them and then just reinvested in the quality of life surrounding schools, or, you know, the next one being like mental health services. Next chapter is about that. And we've talked about that on the show.
You would get more results adding Larry David into each of these situations.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the Pythagorean theorem. Why A squared plus B squared? Why C squared? I don't know. That's a lot of letters. I don't know. But like, yeah, I think that like I hear you. I mean, it's all bringing more force, and especially the most excessive type of force that we have on a local level into situations that need to be treated delicately should just generally be a bad idea. I don't know, talk crazy, but like as a, you know, being in school, it's this is why when we're talking about, like, you know, this brings us kind of all the way back to like when we're talking about the sanitization of the words that we're using and not using them right, and like the interchangeability of these words. There, like when we're saying defund the police, we're not saying take their money and leave them with a little bit of it. We're taking it all and putting it back in places that are going to make them even more obsolete than them having no money. So we're going to put them into our public education system. We're going to put them into public safety systems, into mental health, the places that are going to prioritize your mental health, research that helps build those sorts of positive, positive growth spaces in our actual communities. And I think that that's the problem right now. I think that a lot of people are saying defund with reform and not defund with abolition, the way that it needs to be said on social media. And also, I'm already seeing how quickly the conversation has moved past the people who've been talking about it for years to like dummies, idiots. I'm just like, who the fuck is this person? I've seen this person on Twitter for 7 years talk about prison abolition. And you're gonna talk to this person learned about it last week. Like, I think that like we need to also just be so cognizant of like who are the people who should be the leaders of this. And I think that we're just so primed to be like, oh, I'm gonna step in there and I'm gonna, learn everything and I'm gonna do it. And like, no, there's people who know how to do this and they know what the research needs to be. I think we need to support them. And as we were saying before, all eyes are on Minnesota right now. All eyes are on Minneapolis, and that's a scary thing. But I think that, giving them as many resources and as much assistance as possible to show that that is going to be a successful, viable system is what's going to hopefully long-term be able to help us, completely make the police system defunct and build community resources that make a more healthy society. And as somebody who studied science, it's like our country is so far out of whack. There's no sort of homeostasis at all. And all our money is in the weirdest, dumbest things. Like, I think that what changed this is that people finally saw the might of the U.S. government, the U.S. police system as a military arm pointed at its own people, and finally started also seeing, oh, that's what other countries see about us. And I think that that image is scary. And I think that now that we have solutions in place and not just being able to label the problems, I think we should start exploring those things. And I think we should be doing it quickly. And if anyone is making that happen, it's Minneapolis. And let's support them 100% and get to a place where we can show that prisons and police are obsolete and unnecessary and were never necessary in the first place.
Let's prove it.
I mean, I do definitely think like there is a long history of the abolitionist movement, but it's important. I mean, I think personally to like acknowledge that there hasn't always been like a unified sort of model for what it would look like. And some people who identify as abolitionists do think there should still be a role for dealing with violent people that involves like maybe separating them from society, temporarily rehabilitating. And some people don't. Some people say that's not real abolition. But I think that's part of dialectics, is having that conversation and seeing how it plays out. I will say though, I think what's really important now is the words are important, right? And I think we should, be unafraid of claiming terms like abolition and defunding and things like that. But what's really important, I think, is the actual steps that are taken more so than what label is behind them, because we could have, a quote unquote abolitionist program that privatizes the security force and ends up being even worse. Like that could happen. So
yeah,
terms are important, but I really think at the end of the day, we have to pay attention to the actual policies, not fall into the trap of liberal reforms that we've seen in the past. But also, be cognizant of where we're going. Because, to me, the goal is communism, right?
Yeah.
But even then, and this is just me putting my cards on the table, I think there's got to be a role for, like, it would look totally different. But I think, even in a propertyless, sort of stateless society, there might be some people who need to be separated, That's just my take, but maybe that's the Irish cop in me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, those.
I forgot about
for
that.
brutality cannot be contained.
Fuck your grandpa.
Fuck your grandpa, dude.
Yeah. Well, like every once in a while, there's a very small percentage of people in society that are just like, John Wayne Gacy or whatever. And like those people are going to be used as the argument every single time for the whole system existing. And I don't know. I don't think that it's I think that that argument's actually a very small part of this argument. And whatever side of the fence you land on it's not really that consequential. Like, I think that if we had some sort of system in place to look at a psycho axe murder every time it happens and take care of the guy and separate him from people, and that's all police we end up with, to me that sounds fucking fine. But I could see how people want to be purist about this or whatever. But to your larger point about the goal being communism, I think when we look at this book and look at what he's talking about in terms of the solutions are kind of far away from the argument we're having about police. The solutions that he's describing in this book are reforming neoliberal capitalism. So, for instance, how do you fix the culture of schools and the fact that like young students don't find pathways out of schools and into like a successful career? Well, it's you get rid of the neoliberal fucking reform, which is the thing that creates a situation in the first place where teachers don't have the interest of their students at heart. They have the interest of their paychecks, and they're, you know, in opposition with each other and in some sort of crisis. That's just socialism. That's just looking at neoliberal capitalism and going, this sucks. It just happens to also be the underlying like thing that causes this friction with this police factor involved or whatever. So like we're in a moment where I think that we could probably use this to even sneak in some of this reform that we were arguing in a political, you know, electoral way before, and it didn't fucking happen. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. It requires, you know, a rejection of just like all the capitalist structures that exist in, you know, in all the different spaces that we can. And also requires people to realize that in order for this to work, power is going to have to get lost in certain ways and reallocated to different places. This is all about a reallocation of power to the people in a very specific way, and to destroy a carceral state where we're just making people into disposable agent parts of this capitalist machine. And the thing is, all roads lead to socialism as something that we fix, to the point where it's like, yo, when fucking, you know, when we all needed money, they're like, all right, here's a little bit of socialism, but don't think we're going to give you any more. Like, bro, like, come on. Like, the people that are working for us, the people that we are electing, that we are, you know, paying our good hard-earned dollars that we shouldn't have had to work as hard as we do to make those dollars, that money is going to people who are actively invested in not listening to us. And I think that, you know, the fact that Minneapolis is popping right now. When Jacob Frey pulled up to those protesters and they said, get out of here, I was fucking weak. I was crying. I said on Twitter, I don't know, I'm a big Space Jam fan, deep cut, but there's a part where like Charles Barkley loses his skills in basketball, and then he plays against these girls and they wash him, and then they're like, you ain't Charles Barkley. You just somebody who looked like him. Be gone, wannabe. Be gone. I was crying when I saw that. And it's like, we need to start taking people to task like that. And I think that, you know, it was scary to do that to cops, even though like we do pay their paychecks, we do pay their bills, and they have allocated all this money to this space, but it needs to be given back to the systems that are going to help actually keep us safe, and not this myth of safety that they have built their whole image around, and this myth of fraternity and brotherhood when it's actually just a white hood and it's just people beating people up and having carte blanche to do that shit. So I think that it requires a very critical eye that we've already had in so many different ways, in so many different conversations, on where all of our money is going, where that's coming from, and how hard we have to work under capitalism just to make a living wage in this sort of way that we're not going to have to do all of that if we find a way to reallocate this money from systems that are actively trying to harm us and politicians that are actively trying to harm us. And I think it requires a hypervigilance on every level of government that people are too busy or too tired to do at the end of the day of working. And this is all by fucking design. So I think that the more that we can be vigilant and work really, really hard to like keep those doors open to a better, more socialist, more prison abolitionist, more police abolitionist world, the better that things are going to be in this world. Because we're just going to have a more rehabilitative society. And honestly, I can see it. If we're going to talk about the country as an organism, we're going to have enter a more homeostatic space that we can actually inhabit and live in and thrive in.
Cool. I totally agree. I think that we should probably wrap up here just because we don't want the episode drag too long. And we'll probably cover some more of this in the bonus later this week. But Mamoudou, thank you so much for joining us. This is probably a good note to go out on. We kind of got to where we needed to get, which is, you know, the socialism and obviously the hilarious boy mayor of Minneapolis and his uncertain future, you know.
Fucking Harry Styles for mayor. What the fuck is wrong with that, man? My man, I love seeing politicians get clowned in public. It's my favorite thing in the world. But when he was in the crowd and he had that little mask on, and then they're like, are you going to defund the police? And he was like, nah, I don't think I'm gonna do that. They're like, get out of here. I was like, yeah, get that motherfucker out of here. It was so funny, man.
Wearing his T-ball shirt.
Oh, what a fucking cornball, fucking wingding. God, dude.
Yeah.
Why couldn't he just do he couldn't even do a politician answer and just say like, I'll think about it or something like that.
Yeah, my man was just like, nah. I love Target too much.
You should always yell at the mayor, regardless of context or situation. It's healthy, it's good for them, and it's good for you.
Yeah.
Honestly, 100%. I think we need more town halls where like that dude in LA was just going in on the police chief. I would love that. I mean, the thing is, like, I think that the weird thing about this moment is that like people are not fitting those rules. We're trying to be nice to each other. We just cussing people out on public town halls like it's C-SPAN in 2004.
Speaking,
like, everyone knowing it's a shit.
Can we drop that in? Can we drop that in? Because that is fantastic.
Yeah, I'll drop it in. The bagel boss cop.
Isn't stained by someone in Minneapolis. It's still got a shine on it. And so do theirs. So do theirs. Stop treating us like animals and thugs, and start treating us with some respect. That's what we're here today to say. We've been left out of the conversation. We've been vilified. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Trying to make us embarrassed of our profession. 375 million interactions. Overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He looks like that fucking dude.
Oh man.
Speaking of police chiefs, this is unrelated, but I have a lot of notes because there's just so much shit happening this week. So there's this police chief in Houston, Texas, Art Acevedo, I've been talking about a lot on various things because I have just personal beef with him because I lived in his cities for so long. But he also he's just a fucking theater kid, and he's this cop that likes to grandstand and sort of like make these big speeches and cry a lot of crocodile tears. And he was doing a lot of the like let's all come together and dancing with people and stuff. And it's really bothers me because he's no good. I mean, his police have killed like 6 people in the last 6 weeks in Houston, so he has no idea what he's talking about. He's the chief of Houston police, and his police actually arrested George Floyd when George Floyd lived in Houston and planted drugs on him. So Art Acevedo, no good. But as long as we're embarrassing politicians, I did discover something about Art Acevedo recently, which is that, like so many members of the government, he has an embarrassing child that has a career in improv comedy and sketch comedy. So
no way.
Yeah. I found a guy, his son is named Matt Acevedo, and he actually... I don't know if I even want to drag him that hard because he does share a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff. So I think he hates his dad a little bit, but he also shares like a lot of the 8 can't wait. Like, we're going to all figure it out together stuff. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's trying.
He's threading the needle.
Listen, you know how many kids fucking hate their parents, bro? Like, I think that kids now have like learned a little bit more about the world than we did when we were younger. We were blinded to so much, but like kids, they have all that access. They're like, oh no, you're a fucking clown cake. Fuck you. Like Bill de Blasio, the police are pressing your daughter, and you're like, I'm still gonna stand with them. Like, you fucking hurt. What the fuck is wrong with you, bro? Like, if you're not gonna protect your fucking daughter, there's no hope for any of us. You fucking, oh god. When I saw that shit, I was like, oh, there's no hope. If you can't even like be like, yo, the police pressed my daughter and they doxed her, this is personal. You're like, nah, we still, what we need to do? We need to talk about police unions. It's like, someone should slap the shit out of you. I feel bad for your black children. Get them out of that house, bro. You fucking suck, G. I was so mad.
Yeah. Yeah, at least Bill de Blasio doesn't do improv. That would be more embarrassing for his daughter if she was also the mayor and was like, zip, zap, zop, we're going to reform these cops.
Reform these cops. I ain't seen.
All right. Well, let's get some plugs in and get out of here. Mamoudou, where can my listeners follow you and find you and read your stuff and listen to your stuff and all that stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Mamoudou NDiaye, MamoudouNDiaye, and on Instagram at Mamoudou About Nothing, MamoudouAboutnothing. Wow, that was hard. That was very difficult. Again, I love talking about all this sort of stuff. I always say I wish I didn't know. I had to know to understand everything about the world and be better about it. And I was raised by Afghan studies professor and a nurse, and I've had a lot of wonderful things happen in my life. But at the end of the day, I'm a fucking clown, bro. I love making fun of shit. I love roasting shit. That is where I live. But I will always do it with a little bit of heart and trying to make things better for marginalized people. So don't come to me on no fuck shit, and we'll be good. But also follow me. I'm cute. So.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, man. Thanks for joining us. Does anybody else got anything to plug before we get out of here?
Yeah. Follow me on Twitter at Patak Jokes, PTAK Jokes. My pinned tweet right now is a radio show I made with my other podcast, Ballin' Out Super. It's Serial. It is a serial parody, but about Dragon Ball Z. We're using it to raise money for Reclaim the Block to defund the police in Minnesota. So far, we've raised $3,600, and I want to get up to 5K. So come check it out. Donate what you can. You get the link. And we were working on it for like a month. It's pretty good. At least sound quality wise, you'll be impressed. Check it out. It's pretty funny.
At Anders Lee here on Twitter, Dursley1 on Instagram. If I could just quickly plug Black Visions Collective out of Minnesota. They're doing a lot of great work. Check them out online, and please donate if you can.
Cool. Yeah, I'm at Feral Jokes on everything. I run this podcast. My other podcast is called Why You Mad? I do it with Luisa Diaz, my friend who's an anthropologist and comedy booker and everything. And we get into theory and art history and stand-up comedy and all that stuff on that show. If you haven't listened to it, if you enjoyed the shows that she did on this show, it's a spinoff. Also, if you're a fan of our show and you have you ordered merch, the merch is just taking a long ass time, but hopefully it'll be out like this week or something. Sorry, I'll try and include something nice for you. Yeah, other than that, I don't know. Donate money. Society is happening everywhere. The Joker is happening in real life. It's all happening. Fuck Anders' grandpa.
Okay,
grandpa. Oh, sorry. I fell asleep, but I woke up for that. Yo, fuck Anders' grandpa.
If we leave you with one thing today, it is do not fuck around with Anders' grandpa. He's a pig. He's a pig. He's part of the problem.
He is underground.
Just for a grand pig, though.
Yeah, he's good.
He's cooked.
He's cooked.
All right, man.
All right. Thank you so much, y'all.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
It's finished.
It's finished.
Cool.